So, first thing that I would like to tell you about is I've come into this space very recently. I'd be lying if I say that I've known about all this stuff for a long time. So, I'm being as honest as possible. So, if you think that I've misstated something, or if I
Okay.
uh, attach someone else's quote or something like that to someone else, you can correct me. You're free to do that.
Okay. Sure.
All right. Okay. So, first thing that I would like to start with is have you watched Barbie?
No, I still haven't watched it. I've absolutely refused.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's interesting. I probably should because I've heard different perspectives from a lot of them from men in the Manosphere, the red pill community. Some people have said it's actually great if you interpret it the right way, and others are just like, "Oh my God, don't give them your money."
Yes.
So I'm sure I'll be watching it soon, but I haven't seen it yet.
All right. So we both know why we have brought up Barbie in the first place. That's because it's one of the important things that we'll be talking about in this discussion of ours. And I'm really moved by your quote, which is great minds discuss gynocentrism, average minds discuss feminism, and small minds discuss women. So I think that would be a perfect theme to set our discussion on. So
Sure,
yeah.
absolutely.
Yeah. So if I get it right, your red pill moment was in 1993 when Warren Farrell has released his book. It was in
You did your
September.
homework, yes.
It was in September, if I'm right.
It was of 93, yes, sir.
Yeah. So it's an interesting year for me. That's because that was the same year we had one of the brilliant movies from Hollywood. It's called Mrs. Doubtfire. I'm sure you know about it.
Oh, yes.
Yeah. So this movie, I think, if I'm right, it released in November of the same year. So the reason I brought this movie up is very simple. After you've read the book, did your lens change to such an extent that Mrs. Doubtfire movie started to appear as a horror film?
I would say, and again, I'm at a bit of a loss because I didn't see Mrs. Doubtfire until years after it was released and came to television.
Mhm.
But I think the real answer to your question is that it felt like a switch was flipped in
Yeah.
my head. I saw everything differently, everything.
Yes.
Every person, every interaction, all the social rules and customs that we live by, all of a sudden, all of this took on a very different meaning. Almost all stuff I had never noticed in my life
Mhm.
until I read Farrell's book.
Mhm. I understand. I understand. That's because while I'm doing research for the interview, I also understood that your family was associated with military, and then you worked as a trucker and also in psych and addiction centers, if I'm right.
Yes,
And
that's
then,
correct.
yeah, so far. So I understand why your influences are categorized in such a way in chronological order. So I relate with what you say a lot. Yeah. So that's
Right.
one. So next thing I want to understand is I think your first introduction to men's rights movement in India is through Mr. Anil Kumar of Save Indian
Yes.
League, correct?
Yes. I met Anil in 2014 at our
I
first
know.
international conference on men's issues. He came.
Yes. There was also an issue with the microphone when Warren was trying to introduce you, if I'm right.
Yes. You really have done your homework.
Yeah. I also remember Mr. Dean Esme making an announcement. Yeah.
Yes.
Yes. So when you met Anil Kumar and Amit Deshpande and all these people from Indian Ocean, what was your first reaction like about how did they formed the men's rights movement? How did it appear to you? Was it similar? Was it worse? Or was it less than worse?
I'm going to have to be brutally honest here, even about myself. I was, at the time that I met Anil, I was really ignorant of Indian culture. I didn't understand even your judicial system, your system of governance, how it's set up and structured. Knew almost nothing about it. And my impression of India was probably like many Americans. We saw that as a patriarchal nation where men were in charge and women were kept in line. Uh, Anil disabused me of that notion very thoroughly. Just a few conversations with him, and I saw that we had incredible similarities between East and West. That the problem is fundamentally the same thing in gynocentrism.
Correct, correct, correct. And also, one of the important reasons that I brought this up is because how do you see the mechanism of Indian rights, Indian men's rights movement works on? Like, what was the most captivating thing about our structure here?
That's an easy question for me. And Neil was great in explaining this to me and showing me how that their SIF Foundation was working. What they did in India was rather, typically in the American model, you go out and you say, here's an idea. I want you all to get behind this idea, and everybody work toward this idea. But what they did in India was they looked at the needs of men who were caught up in, dowry and all these other craziness that goes on there around marriage and divorce. And they started saying, what do these guys need? Why don't we give them a place to go, a sense of community, a connection to other men? In other words, instead of asking guys who are beat up by the system to come give us money and work for us, we said, what can we do for you? That was it was actually a total flip away from what we had done in America. And I have used that here for the past several years in providing men's groups online and providing places for men to go, to get together, to join and talk about these things. Were it not for the Indian model, I don't think that would have happened. That's how great that influence. And I hope other people across the world really learn from what the Indians have done. They figured this thing out. You provide men something that they're missing, even if it's just some reassurance and comfort and friendship. You provide them something. And then eventually out of that will grow activism. And the Indians have no peers in this in the world. They're the very best at it. And I'm guessing they always will be.
Yes, yes, that's brilliant. I'm really glad that you have our model has helped you to apply it to your place as well and see positive results. That's good. That's good.
I would say it's done more than help. I think it corrected our model.
That's really lovely to hear. It feels like a good validation as well of our work that happens. All right, and I'd like to state that one of the primary reasons that I'm doing this interview is because of three primary reasons. The first one being most of the people in India are not aware of the glossary of the men's rights movement. To start with, romantic chivalry, or the Eleanor of Aquitaine and her daughter Mary, misandry, gynocentrism, hyperagency, hypergamy, whether it is males compete, females choose, or mutual selectivity. Or it could be something like hiding in the man cave. All these glossary items. I'm sure that you're aware of all these things. So,
absolutely.
Yeah. So that is the first reason. Second thing is, I want to find a framework that is that can be derived from science-based approach, and also be able to apply it to all the people, irrespective of the cultural background they come from. So now that you might be also aware that we have such a huge number of religions, castes, and all that.
Sure.
So all that is written into it. And the third reason being that to debunk the narrative that feminism had good intentions and that it had deviated along the way. That is one. And another is rape culture myth. I'm sure that you've heard multiple times that Delhi is the rape capital of the world and all that. So,
yes.
Yeah, and also the patriarchy is ruling over women and their complete control of women and all. And this is where I took some comfort in your words when you said looking at men in the government and saying that they have all the power is like saying looking at women in grocery stores and saying that they have all the food. Did I quote it correctly?
That is correct.
Yeah.
And that's basically a notion that we fundamentally refuse to understand power dynamics as they actually play. We have a model in the West. Men are powerful. We have a history of patriarchy. Women are oppressed by that. And that's the power dynamic. They become victims. They're rape victims. They're victims of domestic violence. They're victims of discrimination in the workplace. They've been held back in education. They've been held back in career advancement. The evil men are putting them down. And that is the power dynamic that is imprinted into the brain of almost every Westerner out there. But when you take a little more honest look at power, at what it means, and the power to stay alive, the power to maintain your freedom, all of these things, we see it's not such a black and white issue. Power is something we need to re-examine, I would argue, all over the world, because I can't think of a culture, and this includes both American, North American, Indian culture, Asian, that really does understand and appreciate the actual power dynamic between men and women. And it is not one of women being oppressed at all. Women have ridiculous amounts of social power that can point a finger at a man and his life will be destroyed, literally. Isn't that power? I mean, that sounds like a lot of power to me. I could point my finger all day long and nobody would care. But if my girlfriend did, the world would come to her side.
Correct.
And want to enforce her will for retribution. That's power.
Correct. So yeah. So I think I hope that I have the right reasons to enter into this sphere and understand what exactly.
I think so. I think you're right on the money.
All right. Okay. So another thing that I've noticed within the Indian context is that most of the Indian audiences view the men's rights movement as a red pill space, and most of the red pill influence they think is coming from Pearl and Andrew Tate. Okay, so those two people have somehow become the representatives of something called as red pill, at least in as far as the audience of India is concerned. That is one thing. Most they would not have heard about you, Paul Elam, or Karen Strawn, Janice Flamingo, or Robert Brockway, or Dean Esme, whatnot. So many people are there, or at least Erin Pizzi in the first place. Most of all,
and Peter Wright, and yes, and that the whole group.
Tom Golden.
Yes.
So
no, they wouldn't have. They would. Andrew Tate has a huge audience.
Correct.
And this is a result, I think, of a long time. The work I did going back 15 years, and Karen Strawn at the same time, Alison Tiemann, and others.
Honey Badger Radio.
Honey Badger, yes. I look at us as laying the foundation for this. And then, of course, that leaves it open to being co-opted. People like Andrew Tate, who isn't red pill, in my opinion, and doesn't represent the red pill community at all. But he has a huge audience. And by people imprinting that on him, it sort of got co-opted. But I don't even know how we beat that, except to correct it when we see it as much as possible, and to understand, this information is so difficult for people to digest, particularly for women. The moment they hear that romantic chivalry is not necessarily a good thing, the moment they hear that women have a sense of privilege in their lives that men don't have, they want to shut down as easily. So it makes it all the more likely that they'll find a quote unquote bad guy. I'm not passing judgment on Andrew Tate, but he is sort of cast as a demon in the world. And then we say, look, that's what that stuff is, when it has nothing to do with it.
So how do you suggest that we define manosphere and the subgroups that are present in it? How do you suggest that we categorize it?
I think that we not do it. I think the effort, you could get into a battle with people about what is the manosphere. I was debating with somebody just the other day about this. This topic comes up. What is red pill? What is the manosphere? I think if we get into battles trying to define it, we're wasting energy. I just encourage people, speak the truth.
wherever it comes from. It doesn't matter which.
Yeah. Don't worry about the label, because here's the thing. We started doing this back in 2009, 2008. Right about that time is when these ideas started coming to the surface. I was so fortunate in my life that I was able to be a part of that. And these ideas, whether people co-opt them, whatever happens, they spread because they're truth. And there are now millions of men exposed to this material who've never been exposed to it before. And if we get into turf wars about who owns the red pill or what is the manosphere, I think that does a bit of a waste of time. I say talk to people about gynocentrism, about romantic chivalry, about the basics. And you notice that people like Tate, they don't talk about those topics very much, largely because they exploit them to make money. But people will eventually come to good decisions. I think men do once they get exposed to information, and it's information we need to expose them to, not an argument over what's red pill and what's not.
Right. So, if I'm getting it right, how do you look back right now? Because I'm sure that there have been some accusations. I don't know if that's the right word. Let's say criticism. There's been some form of criticism on the men's rights movement from the space called Sandman Mekta. I'm sure that you are aware of it. So he alleges that men's rights movement were not very welcoming of his ideas at the time when ICMS started, is what his allegations were. So how do we deal with it? And also I can see men's rights movement actively criticize the red pill PUAs, pickup artists, and all the other domain of this red pill space. So how do we address that? Because there is each group within the manosphere that is accusing one another of some fault or whatever it is. How do you see that? How do you see this?
I got to say, I honestly reject the premise as stated from him that the space wasn't very welcoming. I mean, I've had people in the comments on my material I've been producing going all the way back. And when Sandman got attention, and he's got a great message in many ways, I mean, I don't agree with every word, but he is basically a red pill distributor and a gateway for a lot of guys. And I see people in my comments going back to when Sandman started, saying that they also listened to Sandman. I don't buy the idea that his ideas weren't rejected. Ideas are accepted or not accepted on an individual level. You can't say the red pill community or the MRA community didn't like Sandman. That's just not true. I mean, I reject any notion of that.
Okay. All right. I'm only trying to clear the air so that I don't interpret for at least whenever any person from India looks at this conversation, they'll understand what exactly is categorized that.
No, you're doing fine. I mean, this is the only difference I had in that was with the idea that his ideas weren't accepted. His ideas were the same ideas as ours from the beginning. So, but you haven't caused confusion here. I think that the idea that you have repeated from him does cause confusion. That's not right.
Okay, all right. So, in order to continue slightly a bit and to add more, I remember you had a conversation with Roshvi after he challenged you on some platform, and you people got into a conversation. And how do you look back at it right now, at least from 2024 perspective? Do you think any of his ideas could be applicable given the trends in relationships and all that, or we can still reject those spaces from that coming from Return of the Kings or Roller to Marcy or something like that? How do you say?
Oh, well, I always, I'm not just talking about Roosh here. I like Roosh. I think he did some great things. He opened the door for men to reimagine themselves. And that's important work. I don't have to agree with every word of his to do that. But I look back and I see him and others as integral parts of this whole discussion, very important parts. I understand that he's taken a different path in life now. I don't have any details about that. The only problem I ever had at any time with the sort of Return of Kings things and stuff like this is that often it appeared to me to be a return to sort of like an ideal that was imagined by feminists. Feminists imagined a world where men were kings and rulers and everybody was in charge, and all they did was eat the best food in the house and smoke cigars and drink brandy after a meal while the women and children had crumbs. I think there was it was almost like some of the mentality that came from that area of the manosphere was actually buying into that false narrative that this is the way things were ever for men. Most men live lives of sacrifice. They live lives, either they're married or not. They're working. They're given to their families. They're taking care of people. It's a great burden to carry that we quit honoring with the advent of second wave feminism. It was just the end of honoring anything that men do and taking it all for granted. But again, the stuff from Return of Kings bought into a feminist narrative, in my opinion, in many ways. It still did a lot of good. It was still a great website. I went there to read frequently. I never had anything really hostile with Roosh. I disagreed with him on some matters. But again, this all goes into the mix. We needed Roosh as much as we needed me or Karen Strawn or anybody else. This was an important step in moving toward the direction that men have finally begun to start taking now, and we're actually seeing this growing into something that the world is rather concerned about, and they should be.
Right.
Because if you motivate men to quit taking care of people, that's trouble for the world.
Right. Makes sense. All right. So, another of the criticisms that I found against men's rights movement is that it's female. The face of men's rights movement is female, is what most people criticize the space about. So I remember that probably 10 years ago now, with Karen Strawn herself, you two were discussing about women being part of and being in the forefront of men's rights movement. And also, I remember Janice also made a separate video stating about female white knights, where Sandman himself was warning people to be beware of, to be aware and be alert about women being in the men's rights movement. That's because there could be a possibility that they would hijack the movement so that it would fit their inner gynocentric bias, if I'm right, if I'm stated it right. So how do you address that?
I ignore it. Again, I don't want to repeat what feminists have done, which is silence all men, only women can talk. There are some great women in this space. Janice Fiamingo is one of them. Karen Strawn is another. Alison Tiemann is another. There's a lot of great men in this space too. But these women that are popular now and that have gained traction with the men in this movement got there by what they said, not what was between their legs. They got there with their ideas. And if the ideas, trust me, I know I've seen a lot of women come into this space, and sure enough, they come into the space, they get a little attention from men, and then they start wanting to rearrange the furniture and change everything around to their liking. They all get chased off. I have not seen one of them last into this kind of space for any length of time at all that tried to move the furniture around to their liking. These women, are reflecting what they see men's concerns as being, and I think they're great. I want them out there doing their thing. There's enough room. We don't have to, we don't have a limited amount of real estate in the arena of public ideas. We can get them out there. Women can do it. Men can do it. I do think, though, and it's one of the things we operate with XY Crew, is that we don't allow women into the groups. There is a definite need for male space that women don't come into. But in the arena of ideas, no. I want them out there talking just as much as the men.
All right, it makes sense, because I can confirm to most of it, because I've been following all of your work, Karen's, Genesis work, and they've been consistent in my opinion. I don't think I've seen something like, inner feminist coming or popping up every once in a while, where they would totally shift the narrative to their initial beginnings and all that. I don't think I've observed any of that so far. I think even I can attest to what you're saying. They've been pretty consistent with their advocacy for men's rights. So yeah.
And for the most part, and again, there's exceptions. I've had conflict with some women in the space. I've even had conflict with Indian women in this space. And when I see it, I call it out. And I think every man should. Is the moment that we start seeing somebody get controlling or try to tell other men what to say or how they're supposed to do their advocacy, that's when I think the men really need to come together and point the finger at them and say, you got to go.
Okay. Would you like to address any specifics of Indian spaces where you might have observed this?
Yeah, I had a rather significant several years ago. It was in 17, actually, when we did a conference in the Gold Coast of Australia.
Yes.
We had scheduled Uma Chawla to come speak there. And she messaged me that I had to get rid of another Indian female that was there.
Who was she referring to? The lady that you have?
Oh gosh, what she made a movie. I'm drawing a blank on her name now. She made a movie about marriage in 498A.
Yes, that must be Deepika Narayan Bharadwaj, along with
Deepika Bharadwaj. Yes, absolutely. We had her coming. We were going to show the movie, had her coming to also speak and be a part of the conference. Apparently, there's some sort of catfight between the two. I don't know what it's about, but Uma Chawla writes me and says, I have to get rid of Deepika, which I'm absolutely not going to do. So Uma departed, wouldn't come to the conference, and then spoke negatively of it out there. But again, we haven't heard much from her since. And I addressed it at the time. That was just is like, because you're a female that comes into this space doesn't mean you get to make decisions for us. Right. That's not your call. And she had a hard time hearing that.
I understand. Right. So there's a saying in India that the laws in India are only women friendly, but they have never been justice friendly. Have you ever heard about it?
No, I haven't heard that, but that's a beautiful. We have the same problem here. They are not justice friendly.
Yes.
Oh no, and that's one of the things. My relationship with Anil and talking to the other guys, we just had in a year ago, October, we had a bunch of guys from India come and had a big jamboree here and a meeting in Southwest Virginia. And when you hear the stories that come out of India, what gets done to families in the name of 498A, all this, oh my, it is like, it makes you think we got it really good here because we're not getting whole families thrown into jail. It's hard even for a Westerner to imagine just how bad this is and why people think that India is a nation that doesn't favor women. I have no idea, because it favors them drastically in some ways that are so injudicious that it makes your hair stand up on the back of your neck thinking about it. It's just awful.
Yes, you're right. I wouldn't deny that. It's worse. It's really worse here.
It is.
So if we agree that women have been overcompensated, so if you could add or remove one law that could benefit men and boys, what would it be?
I would take state authority out of marriage altogether. I would, probably a year ago, I would have said I would end no-fault divorce. We have no-fault divorce here in the United States, and it opened the floodgates to divorce, and women take advantage of it. But with the technology that's available to us now, just getting rid of no-fault divorce would just open up an industry of manufactured accusations. So I don't think it would do us any good to do that. I think if I could change one thing, I would end the relationship between the state and marriage.
Got it.
And then I have 20 other laws I would change after that.
Okay, I remember that's because even Karen has mentioned that if there's anything that should be added, that would be default father custody in cases of separation. That is one thing, and if,
I would have listed that number 2
yeah,
coming right after that. I would have said default father custody for sure.
yeah, and also she also said that if there's anything that should be removed from the existing laws, that would be the women should not be able to hold office, is what she had mentioned earlier. I'm not sure if she has changed her stance on this or something, but this is what the latest information that I have as of now. And also, Pearl says repeal the 19th. What do you say to that?
I got to say I'm torn about that. I have mixed feelings. On one hand, I look at our Constitution as applying to everybody. Our American Constitution should apply evenly to everybody in the country, regardless of anything. I really believe that that is morally correct. But I also look at the consequences of giving women the vote, and they've been disastrous. Women in office has been disastrous. Women vote in their own interest and their own interest only.
Right.
Men tend to vote for social interest, for society's interest, what's best for all concerned. Women vote for free birth control. So I would still, I think in the end, stand on my principles. I would not rescind the 19th Amendment. I would allow it to happen. And the thing is, I don't think the 19th Amendment would have been nearly the big problem that it's become if men actually exercised their balls and their spine in governance and in how we conduct our lives. The problem wasn't just women voting. The problem was men giving up power and surrendering to some sort of gynocentric code that ended up helping destroy everything. So that's the best answer I can give you, the most honest.
Understood. Taken, point taken. And there is one of your quotes, I would say, or a tweet that you made probably a few months ago or something. I don't remember, but I saved it. It really was. It was some of the beautiful words that were put together. I'll just read it out. You can tell me about it. So you said, "Never is a man more prone to irrational thinking and poor decision making than when he is infatuated with the woman. It is literally the most vulnerable time next to his infancy." These were your words, and that was some of the beautiful words that were ever said about how men totally submit themselves in the presence of a woman. So, which makes me ask the question: how do we stop men from thinking with their dicks, and also prevent them from going down on their knee?
Man, I wish I had the right answer to that. That's sort of like, uh, how do you make a cow not eat grass? It, it's a difficult proposition, because what happens when we meet as human beings between the sexes, when we're really very definitely attracted to somebody, there's an absolute flood of oxytocin in the brain. There is a flood of endorphins and other hormones that give you pleasure. And we become trapped in trying to keep that maintained. And of course, it's a state of insanity. That's why I said, as where men are most vulnerable, they make terrible decisions. They leave healthy marriages for women that they met and feel attracted to. They marry terrible women because of this flood of oxytocin that they're trying to maintain. They marry the worst of women. They end up 5 years, 7 years later writing me saying, "Oh my God, she's destroyed my life." Well, sorry, you should have thought about that when you were acting on behalf of your penis instead of rationally making decisions about women. This is where men and women are vulnerable there too. I mean, both sexes are involved in infatuation. It's a loop. I think women are a lot quicker to get out of it, and they're much more successful at detaching from it. But to answer your question the best way, I think it begins with, what do we teach our young men? Do
Yes.
we take 15, 16-year-old boys in high school who right now, who sits them down and explains what infatuation is and how vulnerable it makes them and how they have to keep their bearing about them and make good decisions? Nobody. What we teach boys is if you like a girl, your only job is to make her like you back.
Mm.
Terrible, terrible instruction. We set boys up to become failed men by the romantic ethos that feeds into infatuation and elevates it even above real love for somebody. Because
Right.
infatuation has nothing to do with love whatsoever. You're
Right.
infatuated with somebody 20 minutes after you meet them. You can't possibly know them well enough to love them, but we start calling it love, which is another form of insanity, and we mistake it for that. And then guys spend the rest of their married lives trying to maintain that ethos in the relationship, trying to get the woman's approval in that way in her romantic love. It's an insane thing to do. It's terrible. We're just crazy about it. That's another area I think historically India has had a much better approach
Okay.
to how people couple, how they come together as a married couple is a lot more sensible than anything that we do in the West.
Okay. Okay. All right. But I think there the the model with which India progresses with respect to marriage has also not been that great, I should say. It doesn't mean that I'm insulting marriage as an institution that is
Sure.
originated in India as such, but I'm very critical about it because I would be lying if I say it's all pretty good and it's the best model that's available for men in India, at least in 2024. It may have worked a few ages ago or a few centuries ago or something, probably, but ever since 200 years or something, not so good, not so great, definitely.
Okay. And that makes sense. I think probably worldwide right now, the thing that works for men is don't get married.
Right.
It's a sad state,
Mm.
but the real rational decision here, no matter what system you come from, is don't engage it because the problem, the number one cause of divorce is marriage. If you don't get divorced, you're not going to end up divorce raped. And this happens in India on levels the average Westerner would not even believe. If you really set them down and told them the stories of what happens in India when men divorce and there's an accusation, uh, they would not believe it. They couldn't even wrap their minds around it, how bad it is. So yeah, I agree. I still think that arranged marriages historically have a better track record than romantic marriages,
Okay.
but today, don't
I
get
don't see
married,
any
guys.
significance. I don't see any significance. And this is also my observation that most of the men in India are actually very afraid to state that I want to be single. I don't want to get married. That's because I can see that on one hand you will see women with the current mindset shaming men into the incel category if they say they are not interested. And on the other hand, you have governments shaming men into marriage, or probably they would build models in a way that would benefit a couple rather than an individual as a person, for a man especially. But if a woman chooses to stay out of marriage, or if she wants to do anything that she wants to do with her life, she is being rewarded more in a way. And that I find very insulting to men on a whole. And the even worst part is that it's the men who are enabling that.
Sure. Men have always been the problem. I really believe that. I mean, a lot of guys don't want to hear it. They want to blame women. The problem is weak men.
Yes.
And you mentioned, people saying, what's wrong with you if you're an incel, if you don't want to get married? They sort of say, are you gay? What is this? Why aren't you getting married? It takes a thick skin to be red pill and to stand by your decisions. People are going to criticize you. I suggest to men that that is exactly what we need is men who are immune to that criticism, who just don't care. Um, can get overbearing in cases, I know, but the solution is still the same. If marriage is too dangerous, you need to not get married. Uh,
Right. It brings me to another point that most of the men in India, they do not even read up marriage laws before getting married. They do not look up how the framework of the matrimonial laws replied before marriage and after marriage, how it would affect them after a divorce. So they're not aware of it, and most of them, even if their marriage breaks, let's say, they wouldn't shy away from going for another marriage right away. That I find
If
it.
they can afford to, yeah.
I mean, have you really not learned any lesson from your first divorce at all? Because it would actually perpetuate the problem in such a way that most people would think that it's okay if a marriage breaks, we can find another marriage. It's like you just skipped one hell, you just went so close to it and came back, and now you want to find another version of it and then dive into it right away.
And a lot of times, I would say almost all the time, they go about picking another woman the same way they picked the one that didn't work. There's no difference whatsoever. It's like, okay, I lost the bet, so let me make the same bet again and do it that way. I think the chance that we have mainly is with men who are not in relationship. Once a man's infatuated with a woman, you're not going to talk to him about the law. He's not going to want to, he won't hear any of it. He doesn't want to hear any of it because, of course, he erroneously believes that this woman would never do that to him because his oxytocin addled brain is telling him that she's perfect. We need to catch men while they're single and young and I would build it into high school course curriculum.
Yes.
Teach them this is what happens in a divorce. This is how they take your property. This is how they take your children. This is how they turn you into a visitor. This is how they incarcerate you if you break your leg and can't work. Oh, well, too bad. Go to jail with your broken leg. They need to hear this stuff while they're not crazy over a woman.
Yes. Yes.
And then and we still won't reach all of them. I mean, there are plenty of men who absolutely will not listen to any of this, no matter what. Their minds are made up. They're not going to indulge this stuff. And I think we just have to let those men go. They're going to find out the hard way.
Yes.
And it's why, in the end, nowadays, 20 years ago, I had a lot of sympathy for guys that were going through this because nobody was talking about it. They didn't have a chance to learn. Nowadays, men have an opportunity to learn. It's out there. If they're on the internet, you cannot be on the internet and not be exposed to red pill ideas anymore. It's happening everywhere. So now I think we end the sympathy for them and just let them go because they're making their choice. But we can be there for men who are trying to do something different.
Agreed. Really agreed. So, another thing is in one of your probably a radio interview, if I'm right, with Alison Tiemann, you mentioned that there was an issue with a lady by name Paula Wright, if I'm right. Yeah. So I think it was only briefly mentioned that you had an exchange with her somewhere on Twitter or something like that, and I'm not sure what exactly happened. So the reason I brought her up is because do you find her work similar to people such as Christina Hoff Sommers or Louise Perry's or something, where these people make so much noise about modern feminism, but at the end they'll still blame men for women's
I
choices.
think Paul Wright's a great example of that and you mentioned Christina Hoff Sommers, same thing there. We've seen it over and over again. I saw it in Bettina Arndt. I saw it in a lot of women that come into this space that it's like, oh yeah, feminism's really bad. And what they really want is a gang of men sort of paying homage to them and elevating them. And then when anybody calls them out on it, of course, all the fireworks start being displayed. But yeah, there is the phenomena of pygmies is real,
Okay.
and it does come in. And I viewed Paula much in the same light.
Okay. Okay. All right. Yeah. So I just wanted to confirm without making assumptions about the situation. That's all. Nothing else.
No, and to be honest, I don't remember every detail. This has been going back quite a ways with the exchange with Paula Wright, but I remember generally I was sort of like, here we go again. Another woman's in this space. She wants to tell us how to do things. Da da da. It's like, okay, thank you, goodbye, and that's what we need to do with those.
Okay. Is there any valid work that you may suggest from these people, or do you think we can discard every bit of work that they've done because they've
I still refer people to some of Christina Hoff Sommers' books, or Who Stole Feminism and The War on Boys. Has great research in it, a great critique of feminism. I think it's very useful. I just think that when it gets down to the personal motives for what we're doing, these people are in a very different place than I am, or than people like Janice Fiamingo, who is clearly, somebody who understands the power dynamics between women and doesn't call them out, and does call them out on it. Uh, the others, they understand that they don't like feminism, but the moment you mention gynocentrism, romantic chivalry, or any of these other very important topics for men, all of a sudden, oh no, you're terrible people now. And we saw that happen with Sydney Watson. We've seen it happen with, oh God, what's her name? Summers, the blonde girl. Uh,
who is it? Lauren?
Lauren Southern. Lauren Southern.
Yes, correct.
Look like typical Fox News blonde, blah, blah, blah. Same bullshit, just with a different face on it. The moment that she got called out on her privilege, all of a sudden the men of the Manosphere were terrible. They were terrible people. Daisy Cousins, Sydney Watson joined on that train. We know these people, and we know how to deal with them too.
Good. Yeah. So I think my assumption was right in bringing up Paula Wright's situation and all that. Okay. So, do you think governments are actually afraid of men going their own way, and hence
I
they're
think that's why we have feminism.
okay?
I think governments are afraid of strong men, and they should be. The only threat that society can pose to a government is strong men.
Mm.
And I think the government figured out in the 50s, okay, we got all these guys are single head of, or they're head of household. They'll fight. They will fight against communists. They'll fight, but they'll also fight us. They'll fight governments. They'll fight the law the moment they think their families are threatened. So they went about intentionally to disempower men in the family. I think that's why the Ford Foundation and the government, the CIA, was involved in the beginning of the National Organization for Women. This whole thing, they figured out if you can gut the power of men and make them slaves to women, we can control everybody.
Right.
Plus, we'll have two taxpayers instead of one. And I think that's the real. I mean, do you think the government really cared about equal rights?
I don't think so.
No, no, they care about power.
Yes. Mm.
And that's all they care about. And that's why we have that now. I think they don't like the red pill movement at all,
Yes.
because it represents men who are going to reject all that.
Yes. Mm. Right. Okay. The important reason that I brought this up is because I see that if we agree on this, that most men can survive with minimal set of things, like minimalism. They wouldn't need much, or just a chair or table, or a set of TV or PlayStation to play with, a group of friends which they've been maintaining for almost 2 or 3 decades or something like that. Pretty much simple beings, in my opinion. Whereas on the other hand, women are not. No matter if they get something, they wouldn't be satisfied with it. They would always seek for more and more. And I think government has capitalized on this nature of women wanting more and more from life.
They're the ultimate consumers, which is what the government wants: obedient consumers, people who obey the laws and spend money. And it doesn't matter what it's spent on, because the government gets a piece of all of it. That's what they want. And you're right. I remember in my 20s that, a couple of bricks and a 2x4 was a bookshelf. It worked just fine. Had no problem with it. You want a couch, you go get one at a garage sale from somebody. You spend $10, $15, $20 on it back in the day. That satisfies men, and that is not good for business.
Right.
Women, I believe, I'm not mistaken, women constitute about 85% of discretionary spending in the world.
Yes,
That
people.
includes the money that they make, and it includes the money that men make. Women are the ones actually spending it. So the government has set us up to worship women, and their corporations have designed everything around pleasing women. That's why they make fun of men in their advertising and use us as the butt of jokes, because women will buy. If you persecute or put down men, that's a trigger for women to buy. That's a terrible thing to say about our society, but it's true. So they advertise men as these bumbling idiots that they don't even know how to pick up an aspirin and take it when they have a headache. They need their woman to tell them. That's what we're living with. But that is, I think, intentional and by design,
Yes.
is that you want men with their mouths shut, handing their money to women, and women spending it so that corporations profit. And
Right.
that's all it is. It's just that simple.
Right. So that means it comes to a point that we should be actually speaking about spend gap rather than the wage gap. Is that right?
Absolutely. The consumer gap.
Correct.
Uh, and, this goes all the way even to real estate. Real estate brokers know that they got to sell a woman. They don't even care about what the guy thinks about a home, even though it may be the guy that's paying for it. They know they're going to please that woman because that's the way the world works, with women in charge, literally, of almost everything that matters.
Right. Makes sense. Makes sense. And I also see that there's a lot of crap cons like Jordan Peterson, Matt Walsh, Candace Owens, Ben Shapiro, all advocating for marriage and encouraging men to get married. But I don't see them actually advocating for men's rights explicitly, where they would bring some change to the existing laws. That I find it very
You
troubling.
know, that is probably one of my biggest pet peeves right now, is the supposedly conservative establishment, or that these guys represent: Peterson, Matt Walsh, Shapiro, the whole lot of them out there crowing all the time about how important it is for men to get married, and they won't say one word about changing
The
law.
laws. Yeah.
And there's a reason for that, because those guys basically are weak men who are afraid of women, and they know that if they speak out about the injustices in family courts that are prosecuted on men every day in this country, and that women are treated with privilege and bias in those courts, they are going to have their wives and their female audience turn on them. So they sit there and they crow what women want to hear. They refuse to say what is the truth, and the women reward them greatly for it. I personally think these guys are worse than any feminist. Absolutely terrible human beings and intellectual cowards that cannot deal with the reality that's happening in family law. They're disgraceful, all of them.
Right. There's a specific reason as well, because Jordan has a huge fan base in India. I would be lying if I say there isn't. Uh, I should also admit that when I first came across his issues with the campus, where he wasn't allowed because of he refusing to use the pronouns of a particular individual or something like that, and then there was this infamous interview with Kathy Newman. Was it Kathy Newman? I don't remember, but it could be that. So I've seen him, and I almost thought that he was actually voicing out, and he was being a good representative for men speaking up against the existing versions of feminism, the government, and all that. But then I started to see that it just was what do you say, a mask. I don't know how he was able to pull it off for such a long time without anyone noticing it. What do you think about it? Like, how do you think that they
Well,
pull it off?
he was offered challenges. I wrote his people several times, and there were others that were trying to get him to engage. When he came out and made this statement that MGTOW were weasels, um, there was a lot of reaction to that. I did a reaction video. Other people
Aaron has done that,
did the
yeah.
same thing. And there were efforts in the midst of that to reach out to him and say, hey, let's get together and let's talk about these competing ideas. He didn't want anything to do with it. I think one answer I got back was, yeah, we'll talk to you for $30,000 or something like that. Yeah, Um, in other words, no, we're not going to talk to you. This stuff is conscious. I do think that Peterson's aware that he's a sellout. I think Matt Walsh is aware he's a sellout. So is Ben Shapiro, uh, all these others. Oh, yeah, they love to make jokes and make good comedy stuff about feminism, making fun of feminists. And then they spend the rest of their time kissing women's asses without compunction and without hesitation. I just, it's sad.
It's really something that I couldn't digest once I realized that because when I went through phases of understanding all these things, when I first began to understand what exactly happened in these spaces, it took a lot of time for me to segregate where it is actually coming from, who is saying what, and what is exactly the thing that is close to the reality. It took a lot of time for me to figure out, but yeah, I think you already addressed that these topics of gynocentrism, chivalry, and false accusations should be taught right from school levels. I think we've covered that already. So, how do you think that we should evaluate the court system and the judges from the citizen perspective? Do you think that these people should have something like, do you think that they should first qualify some basic examinations with respect to science and biology and history so that we would be given the assurance that they are the right people to sit on the chairs of Supreme Court or the top judges in the world or something? How do you suggest that we bring that change?
Well, relative to our family courts, I want to be careful how I say this because I want to assure you, I mean this figuratively, not literally. Nothing short of all of it burning to the ground it is going to, I don't think will ever make a difference. The even as horrible as the stories are in India, I still get stories here all the time of judges totally ignoring evidence, totally ignoring the law in their decisions. They're arrogant and they're insulated. You don't get cameras in family courts. There's not really an appeals process for family courts. The judges are gods in there. And I think structurally, the only way you begin to do anything about that is you've got to tear it apart and then rebuild it with the right things in mind, the right approach to jurisprudence, because it's not there right now at all. This is a cabal of attorneys and judges that slap each other's backs and have drinks together at the end of the day after they've drained families of all their assets and after they've removed fathers from the lives of children and destroyed them in that way. Then they all go have drinks together. Those guys don't need to be reformed. They need to be punished. They need to be gone. But I think one of the things you can do is bring cameras into family courts. Let people see what's going on in there. And then, of course, educate your judges that their job is to follow the Constitution, that they've got things that bind their decisions and make sure the world can see it when they break away from that. That will create pressure, I think, to help things. But I really don't see this ever changing until the system burns to the ground. It's just too corrupt, uh, just too corrupt for reform.
Okay. So, in order for this to happen, the existing forms of government crush down, do you think men going their own ways a starting phase of that?
I think it's a starting phase, but I think what will get us in the end is, sperm counts are dropping, testosterone levels are dropping, masculinity is fading away. That's going to, I really would love to believe that the red pill movement and men going their own way were really going to create the problem. That's not going to be the problem. The problem is that we're going to end up at some point in the United States with men who can't defend the country. Meanwhile, Russia and China are training their men to be men and to serve in the military that way, and that's going to cause our problems down the road. Um, I don't think it'll be MGTOW that gets it done. I think it'll be the way we poisoned men with endocrine disruptors, all the plastics that we have in food that's killing our sperm counts and killing our testosterone levels. I think that will end up bringing on the collapse.
Right. All right. So, that brings me to the question: how do you see the future of men's rights movement all over the world? Well, where do you think, in its current framework, that it should make some changes to evolve into the best version possible?
I think we need more people doing what the Indians are doing,
Okay.
more than anything else. I mean, that's not blowing smoke. I'm being quite honest here, is that what happens, we've got several efforts, shared parenting efforts. We've got the White House Council efforts to get a White House Council on men and boys, which I think in the end's a terrible idea, but I mean, that's what's happening. But we need more people out there offering something to men that's a better alternative than the lives that they're living. You know, these guys out here that get swallowed up in the family court system, who get put in jail on false allegations. I mean, we're talking millions of men here, and the most they get from most organizations is, "We need you to come help us." We need organizations that take things to those men and try to help them. That's what we need more than anything. We need a huge network of that happening, a network of shelters, a network of online groups like we conducted XY Crew, of connection and events. We're meeting in Budapest this coming summer. Get people to come to that, join together, and connect to each other. We've also got to accept that this is not ever going to be a wholly popular movement. There will not ever be the Victory for Men's Rights Day and a big ticker tape parade for men's rights in Washington, D.C. That's a pipe dream that will never happen. We will always be a minority of men. But we can reach more and more men all the time with the challenge to reevaluate their lives, to see themselves differently, to see women differently, to see the way men and women operate differently. We can do that because, you know, the guys in our groups, they're happy.
Yes.
They're living great lives. They're enjoying themselves. They're not putting their lives at risk in stupid ways. And we call each other out on this as this stuff comes up. I think that's as good as it gets. I don't think we ever are a overwhelmingly large movement. The world is just too gynocentric to
Right.
allow that to happen.
Yes. Yes. Right. So, given your association with ICMI, Save Indian Family Foundation, and MRA scene in India, is there anything that you would like to suggest to us so we may improve our quality of the work over here? Is there anything that you find us lacking from your
No,
perspective?
the only thing I would suggest is that, and this is true for everybody, not just the Indians, I would like to see the Indian model presented more to a Western audience. Because you guys are doing it right. You absolutely have the right idea at the right time. And I think that maybe people that are actually out here working on these issues, not just me, but a lot of others that are actually doing things, if they hear about the Indian model and they hear about it regularly, if becomes part of the dialogue with us, and there should be, the Indian model should be right on the tongue of every Western man. I really believe that. He should understand what the Indian model is, why it works, how it works, and then maybe we can bring this in and we can inculcate it into our culture, our men's rights culture, and start doing a better job helping men. But I think, yeah, you've got the right package. My only suggestion is a better job selling it
Got it.
across the world, not just in India,
Got it.
because the whole world needs what you guys are doing.
I'll see. I'll see what I can do. Probably, it's a start somewhere. Someone has to start. Yeah.
Yep.
So, is there any information on a particular issue that you recently learned within the context of men's issues, which you would like to take back in time and include it in your books so that you may have made people aware of this issue a little sooner?
I think circumcision
Right.
is absolutely near the top of the list. It was a topic I actually avoided. I'm a circumcised man. Why do I don't want to get into the details of that. It might be uncomfortable. So I got plenty of other men's issues. I can deal with those, and I ignored it for a long time. But thanks to the work of people like Brother Kay and others, putting forth the information, the studies about the damage done by this terrible, terrible practice, I wish I could have just built that into everything I did from the very beginning. Because if we can't protect baby boys at birth, how do we protect men?
Makes sense. True. So that brings us to the end of the session. I think we are running close to the time. It's around 1 or 10 minutes, if I'm right.
Yeah,
Correct?
yeah, that's fine.
Few minutes left. So, do you have any questions for me? How do you think is there anything that is there any issue that we have covered or something that we didn't cover, or would you like to?
No, I think you've been very thorough with this, and I think it's important. There's so many. I mean, we talk about false allegations, divorce law, circumcision, conscription into the military. I mean, you could go on and on, just like Cassie J did in her documentary. There's a million men's issues, and the danger is that we can get lost in all of those issues. But you've done a good job of really sticking with what I think are the real fundamental issues. Marriage is a huge one. Our romantic model with women, the romantic model itself, needing to teach boys about where that came from. They don't know where it came from. They just know they're supposed to be on white horses with spears and shields and slaying dragons on behalf of women. And they have no idea where they got that in their head. We need to tell them how this was planted in their head, and that's not a very smart way to approach life. But no, I think you've done a good job, and I've really enjoyed speaking with you.
Really glad that I made I made use of your time in a meaningful way. I'm really glad. All
Very
right.
good. I'll be happy to come back anytime.
All right. That's then. I think my questions are done. I think I've covered most of them as much as I can. So
Super.
thank you so much, and it's
Thank
really.
you.
I feel really glad that I somehow got in touch with you. It was a rare opportunity for me to at least try to see if you would be able to respond to that tweet when I made it initially. I'm glad that you have responded. That's because I was probably sad in a state thinking that, okay, these people may be busy and they wouldn't respond to such, because probably you wouldn't know me at all. So when I saw your response, I was really happy that
No, I'm happy to do it. We've done quite a bit spreading the message with small content. It's this is not. You don't have to have 1 million subscribers to talk to somebody red pill, and hopefully we'll just help promote this, and it'll get out to more people.
Sure. Then that's all. Thank you so much. Then.
All right, take care.